Did you really think I'd show up for a broke girl like you? Marcus's text left Aria Torres frozen in the luxurious restaurant with only $5 left in her wallet. The waiter frowned. Are you sure you can even pay for your drink? The nearby table burst into mocking laughter. Aria lowered her head, ready to slip away quietly, when a man stepped forward and placed his card down to cover her bill. Julian Cross, the powerful CEO, spoke softly. No one deserves humiliation just for being poor. Sit down tonight. You won't eat alone. The entire restaurant fell silent, stunned that the girl mocked for her $5 was defended by a billionaire. Aria's hands shook as she tucked her phone back into her worn-out purse. She didn't look up, didn't want to see the eyes staring at her from every corner of the room. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on her chest. She'd come here hoping for a chance, a real date, maybe even a spark of something kind. Instead, she got a slap of reality. Her cheeks burned, not just from Marcus's text, but from the way the waiter's voice carried that smug edge, like she was a kid caught stealing cookies. The women at the next table, with their perfect manicures and designer bags, didn't even try to hide their giggles. Aria's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. But then Julian's voice cut through steady and calm, like a hand pulling her back from the edge. She glanced at him, his face kind but firm, and something in her softened. She nodded just once and slid back into her seat. Hey, before we go on, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these stories with you, and I'd love to know you're out there feeling this with me. All right, let's keep going. The restaurant was one of those places where the lights were low, the tables gleamed, and every fork felt like it cost more than Aria's rent. She sat there in her plain black sweater, the one she'd worn to every clinical rotation, because it was the only thing she owned that didn't have holes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except a thin silver bracelet her mom gave her years ago. The women at the next table, 3 of them all in their late 20s, dripping in gold, and confidence kept stealing glances. One with sleek blonde hair and a diamond tennis bracelet leaned forward and whispered loud enough for Aria to hear who let her in. This isn't a soup kitchen. The others laughed, their voices sharp like broken glass. Aria's jaw tightened, but she didn't look their way. She just straightened her napkin, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was telling herself to breathe. A new waiter approached, different from the first, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. He was older with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He set a menu in front of Aria, then leaned in, his voice low but dripping with condescension. You might want to stick to the appetizers, sweetheart. The entrees are a bit out of your range. The women at the next table overheard and snickered, one covering her mouth like it was all too amusing. Aria's fingers froze on the menu, her knuckles whitening. She looked up at the waiter, her eyes steady, and said, I'll decide what I can afford. Her voice was soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in cotton. The waiter's smile faltered, and he backed off, muttering something under his breath. The blonde woman clapped softly, mockingly, as if Aria's response was a performance. The waiter came back, a young guy with a fake smile and eyes that judged her faded sneakers. You sure you're in the right place, miss? He asked, setting down a glass of water she hadn't ordered. His tone wasn't mean exactly, but it was the kind of fake nice that stung worse than outright rudeness. This place is kind of upscale. Aria's fingers paused on the glass. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. I'm here for dinner, she said, her voice quiet but clear. The waiter blinked like he hadn't expected her to answer and shuffled off. The women at the next table snorted. Dinner, with what her pocket change, one said, her red lipstick curling into a smirk. Aria's hand twitched, but she didn't respond. She just took a sip of water, her lips barely touching the glass. Across the room, a man in a tailored suit, his cufflinks glinting under the chandelier, leaned toward his date and muttered, She's got some nerve showing up here looking like that. His date, a woman with a pearl necklace and a tight smile, nodded. Probably thinks she's special because he's talking to her, she said, glancing at Julian. Aria caught their words, her fork pausing midair. She set it down slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of her plate. She didn't look at them, but her lips pressed into a thin line like she was holding back a storm. Julian noticed his eyes narrowing slightly. He leaned toward Lila, whispering something that made her giggle, and Aria's shoulders relaxed just a fraction as she watched the little girl smile. Julian sat across from her now, his little daughter Lila coloring on a kid's menu next to him. He didn't say much, just asked her what she wanted to eat. Arya hesitated, her eyes scanning the menu prices: $30 for a salad, $50 for chicken. She felt her stomach twist. "I'm okay with just water," she mumbled, but Julian shook his head. "Pick something. It's on me." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried this quiet strength like he wasn't asking. Lila looked up from her crayons, her big brown eyes curious. "You like chicken nuggets?" she asked Arya, holding up her menu like it was a treasure map. Arya smiled just a little and nodded. "Yeah, I do." For a moment, the room didn't feel so heavy, but the whispers didn't stop. The blonde woman leaned over again, her voice dripping with fake pity. Poor thing probably never been in a place like this. Look at her sweater. Did she pull it out of a thrift store bin? Her friends laughed, and one with a sleek bob and a silk dress added, "Bet she's just here to scam a free meal." Arya's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She set it down, her fingers curling into her palm. She didn't look at them, didn't give them the satisfaction. But her shoulders stiffened, and she sat a little straighter like she was bracing for the next hit. Julian noticed. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Ignore them. They're not worth your time." Arya nodded, but her throat felt tight like she was swallowing glass. As the meal went on, a woman in a crimson dress, her hair piled high, approached the table under the pretense of greeting Julian. She barely glanced at Arya before saying, "Julian, darling, you're so kind to take pity on strays." Her smile was all teeth, her words slicing through the air. Arya's hand paused on her water glass, her fingers tightening until her knuckles paled. She looked at the woman, her gaze steady, and said, "I'm not a stray. I'm a guest." The woman's smile froze her eyes, darting to Julian, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for more. But Arya just turned back to her plate, cutting her chicken with slow, precise movements like nothing had happened. Then Marcus walked in. He was tall, all sharp cheekbones and gelled hair. The kind of guy who wore a tailored jacket but acted like he owned the room. He'd been texting Arya for weeks, playing nice, promising a real date. Now he stood there, his phone still in his hand, smirking like he'd just won something. "Well, well," he said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Didn't think you'd actually show up. Broke girl. What, you thought you could just waltz in here with your $5 and I'd be impressed?" The room went quiet out, every head turning. Arya's face burned, but she didn't flinch. She looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "You invited me." Her voice was calm, but it cut like a knife. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced, like he hadn't expected her to talk back. The blonde woman clapped her hands, delighted. "Oh, this is too good." She actually thought he was serious. Her friend with the bob chimed in. "Honey, guys like him don't date girls like you. Stick to your league." Arya's hand tightened around her napkin, but she didn't say a word. She just looked at Marcus, her gaze unflinching until he shifted on his feet, his smirk faltering. Julian stood up, then slow and deliberate, his presence filling the space. "You done?" he asked Marcus, his voice quiet but heavy like a storm rolling in. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, his confidence crumbling. "Sit down," Julian said to Arya, pulling her chair closer to his table. "You don't need to leave." She hesitated, then sat, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Just as the tension eased, a young couple at a nearby table started filming, their phones pointed at Arya like she was a zoo exhibit. The guy with a flashy watch and a cocky grin whispered to his girlfriend, "This is going viral. Broke girl gets rescued by a billionaire classic." His girlfriend laughed, zooming in on Arya's face. Arya noticed her eyes flicking to the phone for a split second before she looked away, her lips pressing together. She reached for her water, but her hand shook slightly, betraying the calm she was trying to hold on to. Lila, still coloring, looked up and frowned at the couple. "Why are you being mean?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the noise. The couple froze, their phones lowering, and Arya's hand steadied as she gave Lila a small, grateful smile. The restaurant stayed quiet for a moment, the air thick with tension. The women at the next table exchanged glances, their laughter gone. The waiter hovered nearby, unsure what to do. Lila, oblivious to the drama, pushed her coloring page toward Arya. "Draw a flower," she said, her voice bright. Arya picked up a crayon, her fingers still trembling, and started sketching. Her lines were careful, precise, like she was pouring everything she couldn't say into that little drawing. Julian watched her, his expression unreadable but soft. The room started buzzing again, but it was different now, less cruel, more curious. People were starting to wonder who this girl was, why a man like Julian Cross was sitting with her. By the next morning, the story had spread. Marcus, still stinging from the night before, posted online, broke nursing student tries to gold dig a billionaire. Pathetic. He included a blurry photo of Aria at the restaurant, her head down her sweater, looking even shabbier in the dim light. The post blew up, racking up thousands of likes and comments. $5? Girl thinks she's Cinderella, one read. Another bet she planned the whole thing to trap him. At Aria's college, people whispered in the halls. A group of students in her nursing program laughed as she walked by, one calling out, "Hey, $5! Girl, where's your sugar daddy?" Aria kept her head down, her backpack slung over one shoulder, but her steps slowed like each word was a weight. In her nursing class, a group project meeting turned sour fast. Aria's teammates, a trio of polished students with expensive laptops, barely looked at her as they divided tasks. When a girl with glossy hair and a designer backpack said, "Aria, just take the easy stuff. We don't need your drama messing this up." The others nodded, one smirking as he added, "Yeah, stick to handing out flyers or something. Leave the real work to us." Aria's pen stopped moving on her notebook. She looked at them, her voice low but steady. "I'll do my part. You do yours." The room went quiet, the teammates exchanging uneasy glances, but Aria just turned back to her notes, her handwriting neat and deliberate, like she was carving out her place. She got to her dorm and found her roommate Sarah packing a bag. Sarah wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm staying with a friend for a while," she said, her voice clipped. "This whole thing is too much." Aria stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "You believe them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah didn't answer, just zipped her bag and left. Aria sank onto her bed, her hands covering her face. Tears slipped through her fingers, quiet and hot. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through the comments, each one sharper than the last. Her thumb hovered over the screen, like she was thinking about typing something, but then she set it down. She wasn't going to fight them, not like that. The next day, Aria was in the campus library, her book spread out trying to focus. A group of students nearby started whispering, their voices loud enough to carry. "That's her, the $5, girl one said. A guy with a backward cap and a smug grin. "Bet she's loving the attention." Another, a girl with hoop earrings, laughed. "Yeah, probably faked the whole thing for clout." Aria's pencil snapped in her hand, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She didn't look up, just set the broken pieces down and grabbed another. Her hands moved steadily, underlining a passage, but her jaw was tight, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. A librarian passing by paused, gave the group a sharp look, and they quieted, but the damage was done. A few days later, Julian called her. His voice was steady, like always, but there was something new in it, urgency. "I want you to come to a press conference," he said. "It's for my company. I need you there." Aria hesitated more, her fingers twisting the cord of her hoodie. "I don't know, Julian. People are already talking." He didn't push, just said, "You're stronger than they think. Trust me." She didn't know why she agreed, but she did. The press conference was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel, the kind of place that made her feel small. She wore her best jeans and a plain white blouse, her hair still in that same ponytail. Reporters filled the room, their cameras clicking like insects. Aria stood off to the side, her hands clasped tight in front of her. At the press conference, a reporter in a sharp blazer stood up, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Mr. Cross, isn't this just a publicity stunt? Pairing your brand with a nobody like her?" She gestured at Aria, her tone laced with skepticism. The room tensed, cameras swiveling to catch Aria's reaction. Aria's fingers tightened on her bracelet, but she didn't flinch. She met the reporter's gaze, her voice calm. "I'm not a nobody. I'm a nurse." The room stilled, the reporter blinking caught off guard. Julian smiled faintly, then stepped forward, redirecting the conversation to the charity fund. Aria's words hung in the air, simple but heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. Julian took the stage, his suit sharp, but his face warm. He looked out at the crowd, then gestured to Aria. "This is Aria Torres," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "She's the inspiration behind our new campaign." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It's called $5 of hope. Because sometimes that's all someone has, and it's enough to change everything." The room erupted in murmurs. Aria's eyes widened, but she didn't move. Julian went on talking about a new charity fund to help people like her students' workers, anyone struggling to get by. The cameras turned to her and she lifted her chin just a little, her bracelet catching the light. The headlines came fast, from $5 girl to humanitarian symbol. People shared the story, not just in the city but across the country. The comments started to shift. She's actually kind of inspiring, one said. Another takes guts to show up with just $5. Aria saw the posts but didn't read them. She was too busy working clinicals exams late nights studying. But the whispers at school didn't stop completely. A professor pulled her aside one day, his face stern. "You need to be careful, Aria," he said. "This thing with Cross, it's not good for your future. People think it's a stunt." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "It's not," she said, simply then walked away, her sneakers quiet on the tile floor. During a hospital shift, Aria was checking a patient's chart when a nurse older and jaded with a clipboard tucked under her arm muttered to a colleague, "That's the $5 girl. Think she's hot stuff now, huh?" The other nurse laughed, not even trying to be quiet. Aria's hand paused on the chart, her pen hovering. She took a slow breath, then kept writing her strokes steady. The patient, an elderly woman with kind eyes, reached out and touched Aria's hand. "Don't listen to them, dear," she said softly. "You're doing good work." Aria's lips curved just slightly, and she squeezed the woman's hand before moving on her head high. Back at Julian's company, things were getting messy. A group of shareholders, older men in expensive suits, the kind who cared more about stock prices than people called a secret meeting. They sat around a long table, their faces tight with anger. "This girl is dragging our image through the mud," one said, his voice sharp. "We're a tech company, not a charity case." Another nodded, his watch glinting as he gestured. "If she stays involved, we're out." Julian listened, his hands folded, his face calm but unyielding. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just leaned back in his chair like he was waiting for them to finish. Aria heard about the meeting from a friend who worked at the company. She sat on a bench outside her dorm, staring at the ground, her hands twisting together. She didn't want Julian to lose everything because of her. She thought about calling him, telling him she was done, that she'd walk away. Her fingers brushed the bracelet on her wrist, the one her mom gave her before she passed. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was back in her old neighborhood, sitting on the front steps with her mom listening to her laugh. "You're enough, Aria," her mom used to say. "Don't let anyone tell you different." She opened her eyes, her jaw tightening. She wasn't quitting. At a charity event a week later, Aria stood quietly by a display of donation pledges, her hands clasped behind her back. A wealthy donor, his tie loose and his breath heavy with wine, leaned too close and said, "So you're the famous $5 girl. What's a poor thing like you doing in a place like this?" His laugh was loud, drawing eyes. Aria's fingers tightened, but she didn't step back. "I'm here to help," she said, her voice, even her eyes locked on his. The man's laugh faded and he mumbled something before walking away. A volunteer nearby, a young woman with a clipboard, gave Aria a small nod, like she had just seen something worth respecting. The next week, Julian called another meeting. The shareholders filed in, their faces smug, ready to push him out. Aria was there too, standing quietly by the door, her hands in her pockets. Julian didn't waste time. He clicked a remote and a screen lit up with grainy CCTV footage. It showed a library 2 months earlier. Aria was there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, studying at a table. Little Lila was nearby, clutching a juice box. Suddenly, Lila's face turned red, her hands clawing at her throat. Aria dropped her books, rushed over, and pulled an EpiPen from her bag. She moved fast, calm, like she'd done it 100 times. Lila's breathing steadied, and Aria stayed with her, holding her hand until the paramedics arrived. Julian paused the video. The room was silent. "That's Aria Torres," he said. "Without her, my daughter wouldn't be here. I didn't choose her for PR. I chose her because she saved Lila's life. And because I love her." Aria's breath caught, but she didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the floor, but her shoulders squared like she was carrying something heavy and refusing to drop it. The shareholders shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat, another looked away. A woman in the back, her glasses perched on her nose, started clapping. Slowly, others joined. The room wasn't against her anymore. After the meeting, a junior employee, nervous but bold, approached Aria in the hallway. "I saw the video," she said, her voice shaky. "You saved that little girl." I lost my brother to an allergic reaction." "Thank you." Aria's eyes softened, and she nodded, her voice quiet. "I'm glad I could help." The employee hesitated, then handed Aria a small handwritten note. It said, "You're my hero." Aria tucked it into her pocket, her fingers lingering on the paper like it was something she needed to hold on to. The news spread fast. The CCTV clip leaked online, and people couldn't stop talking about it. $5, girl saves CEO's daughter was the new headline. Aria's phone buzzed with messages, some kind, some still cruel, but she didn't answer any of them. She kept going to class, kept studying, kept moving forward. But the weight of it all was still there, pressing down. She'd walk across campus and feel eyes on her, hear whispers behind her back. She didn't flinch, didn't hide, but her steps were heavier, like she was walking through water. A month later, Julian threw a party to celebrate the charity fund's launch. It was at a fancy hotel, all chandeliers and champagne flutes. Aria wore a simple navy dress, something she'd borrowed from a friend. She stood by the window looking out at the city lights, her bracelet glinting in the soft glow. People milled around talking about the fund about her. Most were kind now, but some still whispered. "She doesn't belong here," one woman muttered, her pearls catching the light. Aria heard, but didn't turn. She just sipped her water, her fingers steady on the glass. Then Marcus showed up. He pushed through the crowd, his face red, his voice loud. "You're nothing but trash.